Thank you, everyone, for giving me this opportunity. Great. Can you hear me now? Excellent. Thank you. So, I flew in day before yesterday in the evening. I just went for a little walk in campus. I went to Mandakini Hostel, which was my old hostel 43 years ago in 1980. And I was just talking to a few bunches of students, and I was more curious how they wash their clothes and what food they eat and do they have water shortages and all that. But they wanted to talk about climate change, and so we talked about climate change. And I really found that their knowledge of carbon and carbon literacy and what is climate change and what causes it and how do we fix it to be very, very poor, even absent. One of them even told me that somebody had said that if we stop using fossil fuels too quickly, that we would decarbonize too quickly and another ice age might come. And I thought, oh God, we're in real trouble here. So everybody here who's an academic, I beg you, please make sure your students really understand carbon and climate change. And we really need that even at the high school level, because my generation has caused this mess. And your generation will have to fix it, but you can't fix it if you're not educated about it. So today we will talk about the role of digital techniques in the coming energy transition. I'm going to start with a little bit of a philosophical perspective. I'm calling the age that we are in now an age of macroeconomic decoupling. I'll explain that in a moment, but it's a very, very exciting time that we are in. This huge $10 trillion industry that has tentacles into our way of life is completely changing. This is a great time to be alive and to be in this field. So this picture here comes from a blog that I wrote maybe three and a half years ago. And it's sort of the traditional paradigm. Society seeks to increase its wealth, and therefore you have more consumption that drives up the GDP, and that means we have more energy use, and that means there's more emissions. And unfortunately, this is a vicious cycle because we want people to have a better way of life. We want to uplift them, but that necessarily means more emissions, and that necessarily means we are on a planet that is doomed to be unlivable by human beings. So this vicious cycle must give way at some point to a more virtuous cycle. And what does a virtuous cycle look like? Well, instead of targeting wealth per se, we target quality of life. They are similar but different in very important ways. And we consume, but we consume in a sustainable way that is part of a very vibrant circular economy in which every bit of energy, material, resource gets reused 100%. And if you take any waste and multiply it by 8 billion people, it becomes a large number. So it's very important that the loop be very, very tight. And we use energy efficiency to do more with less. And therefore, we live a life that has zero emissions and waste. And all of this contributes greatly to our quality of life. And this becomes a virtuous cycle. In other words, what I'm saying is that wealth does not necessarily translate into quality of life. A higher GDP doesn't necessarily mean using more energy. And more energy doesn't necessarily mean more emissions. However, the only thing in history that has allowed us to change is economics. If you tell people be good, they'll laugh at you. If you tell them it's cheaper, better, faster, they'll buy it. Right? That's the only thing that has ever changed. And we are fortunate that we have economic forces that will allow us to solve this huge crisis that we are facing. What we need is a whole-scale disruption. And this is the classic disruption X curve. The dotted line says that there is some old system, coal, gas, oil, petrol, all the stupid stuff we've done for 100 years, and it's got to go down very rapidly, and it has to be replaced by something, and that something has to be economically feasible. And the beauty of the new idea, the new system, the new paradigm, the new transformation is that it is better, cheaper, faster, and more economical. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. But there is another beauty, which is that the new system will do more than the old system. It will blast through the so-called incumbent mirage. So let me give you an example. We all had dumb phones, and then we got smartphones. The smartphones could make phone calls, of course, but it did so much more. You did not need an iPod anymore. You did not need a phone directory anymore. You did not need maps for directions anymore. You did not need so many things. So it wasn't just a better phone, it did so much better, right? And in a similar manner, if we embrace this transition and we embrace the economics that drives it, we can get to a better life, and we can achieve that decoupling where we can improve our quality of life and uplift billions of people, which is really the most honorable goal that we could ever have. Speaking from a digital perspective, there are some exponential trends that we are dealing with. And as somebody interested in technology and research, exponential is the place to be. So if anyone has looked at microelectronics, to be alive when Moore's law kicked in and you went from a quarter micron to 130 to 80 to blah, 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 that's the most exciting time to be alive. And we are in that stage in energy. So we have three big trends, the three big Ds. Our lives are getting digitized. And this is no less true than in India. You go to the corner vegetable stall, you pay with digital means. It's a very digital society. But from an energy point of view, we are instrumenting all our equipment. We have phase measurement units, we have SCADA, we have smart meters, and we are drowning in petabytes of data that we are not using very well. We also have a decarbonization scheme, trend that's going on. And wind has achieved grid parity, solar has achieved grid parity. So if you want to produce a kilowatt hour by the cheapest means possible, the answer is wind and solar. And you do not have any carbon to capture if you do that. And of course, it is becoming a very decentralized or distributed system. You have microgrids, you have PV panels on the roof here, you have a solar farm there. You have EVs here that are giving energy back to the grid. It's completely getting decentralized. So we have a paradigm that is quite different from the way things used to be. Now, let me just talk about 100% electrification of all of our needs, because at the end of the day, that is the answer. If you electrify all of your energy needs, two things happen. One, it's 3 to 4 times more efficient. And two, you at least have the potential to get that electricity from a clean source. And even if you don't have that clean source today, in other words, if you buy an EV today, but you're charging it with carbon-based electricity, you're still doing a really good thing because it is 3 to 4 times more efficient than your internal combustion engine. And as the grid gets cleaner, you're decarbonizing automatically year after year after year. So what are the trends here? Remember I said it's economics, right? So if you look at solar PV cost, we all know this really, really well. A 20 times reduction in the cost over 2 decades. This is a log plot, by the way, so it's a dramatic reduction in cost. If you look at batteries, this is stationary lithium ion at the pack level. That's even more impressive, 40 times reduction in cost. And if you look at wind, it's much more modest, but still coming down. There's only so much you can do with wind, just make the blades bigger and bigger. That's the main way that you scale wind, and there are limits to that, of course. There is no evidence that these downward lines will stop. In fact, there's a lot of evidence that they will continue. There's more innovation, more economies of scale, more manufacturing learning that gives us evidence that these are going to continue. However, the world of energy will be very, very different, and it will need a different set of tools for us to model, to keep it reliable, to orchestrate it, and that's what I'm going to talk about. There's an interesting term that's used in ice hockey, and I'm sure there's very few people here that have ever played ice hockey, but picture this, right? People are skating around at very high speed and the puck is flying all over the place. You do not skate to where the puck is, because if you do that, you're too late, always. You skate to where the puck is going. And when there are exponential trends, it's very, very hard to predict where that puck is going because things are changing so rapidly. Venerable institutions like Bloomberg New Energy Finance get it wrong again and again and again. Look at all their storage predictions over the last 15 years, all wrong. So the whole point of exponential trends is that there is an experience curve or a learning rate. What is a learning rate? A learning rate is the amount by which cost reduces for every doubling of the volume. In other words, as the volume goes up, you learn, you innovate, you do things more efficiently, and the cost comes down. And it's a virtuous cycle of its own because cost comes down, demand goes up, volume goes up, cost comes down, and it's a beautiful virtuous cycle, right? So if you look at all the trends that I showed you on the previous page, they are manifesting themselves in certain technologies taking off exponentially. And this is simply showing cumulative battery storage installations. We're headed towards 450 gigawatts worldwide, dominated by the US and China. And you look at the EV market share, and of course, EVs are driving battery technology. That makes lithium-ion the preferred technology, and that in turn helps the EVs to get better, etc. And in China, it's at 30% of market share. In Norway, it's 90% of market share. And it's clearly all of these are on exponential trends. So again, it's all about the economics. So let's come right back to energy. If you look at the levelized cost of energy, in other words, per kilowatt hour, you take your CapEx and you discount it appropriately, you take your OpEx, put it all together. The levelized cost of energy from solar and wind have come down very, very rapidly to about $50 per megawatt hour or 5 cents per kilowatt hour. And you see where nuclear, coal, and gas are. And in fact, today, you can combine either wind or solar with batteries to make a hybrid power plant that gives you firm dispatch of your power, and you can do that at a lower cost than a gas peaker plant. So there's not any reason to build a gas peaker plant anymore. So the economics are firmly on the side of clean energy, right? And we see that in reality because most of the new build-out of generation is renewable all over the world. And if you look at the terawatt hours of generation, China, of course, is way up there on top, and then the US and EU, and India has been growing in both solar and wind, right? So let's get to trying to predict what a future system will look like and what kind of digital tool we can develop. And if anybody here is an entrepreneur or a budding entrepreneur, listen up because you might get an idea for a company here. So this particular study was done at Rethink X, which is a think tank. And I think it says something very, very profound. It asks the question, what will be the cost of a 100% solar wind battery system? In other words, I'm going to get rid of all my fossil fuel, and maybe I have a little nuclear, maybe I have a little hydro, that's great. But let's try to build a system that is fully reliable, 100% solar, wind, and batteries. What is the cost? So the vertical axis is the cost, and the horizontal axis is the generating capacity, right? Now, I can make a very small generating capacity that's about equal to the peak that I need for my region, my state, my district. And then I need tremendous amount of battery because you're going to have periods when there's no wind and no sun. And it makes the system very expensive. At the other end of the spectrum, I can have huge generating capacity. And then it turns out I need a little bit less battery in that case. But now I've spent a lot of money, the blue part, on the solar and wind. And there is an optimum somewhere around 3x of generating capacity. What this means is that if we size up our wind and solar to about 3 times the peak load that we desire, and you're thinking, oh, that's too much. Well, yes, it's more than what we need. However, it reduces the battery cost such that you get the optimally sized system. And the beauty of the optimally sized system is that if you have any less storage or any more capacity, either the system is more expensive or it's going to be unstable and not give you reliable power. But there's another beauty of it. You get a very flat bottom boat there at the bottom. And what that means is that I can invest just a little bit more in generating capacity and I can get a lot of extra power. And this is the kind of superpower that Professor Rajneesh was talking about, which you get almost for free. It's not available all the time, but it's available most of the time. And what can you do with it? It depends. You can electrolyze water. You can do Bitcoin mining, if that's your kind of thing. You can run data centers where you have dispatchable loads, and on and on. You can do direct air capture, etc. Right? And so that extra power is called superpower. It's power that's available for almost no money. It's just the wind and the sun. There's nothing, costs you nothing, but it's not available all the time, right? That's the key. So the kind of grid that we will have in the future is very different from the kind of grid we have today. We will have what I would call a breathing grid. And why is that? Because we're afraid of what the Germans call Dunkelflaute, which means the doldrums, the dark periods where you have no wind and no sunshine, right? So think of the grid like having lungs. The sun is shining, the wind is blowing. Oh, we got lots of kilowatt hours. Take a big breath, charge up your batteries, charge up your EVs, preheat your water, electrolyze your water, do your Bitcoin mine, do everything you want because you got so much power. And then it's nighttime and the wind is not blowing, or it's cloudy for 2 days in a row. And you do the opposite. You discharge your batteries. You try to postpone your EV charging. You try to turn thermostats just a little bit in millions of homes just to reduce the need until the sun shines again. You give consumers and factories incentives to use less during that period. And how does this all work? With a digital orchestrator. There's no other way that something of this complexity can be made to work. So what does this orchestration look like? A traditional grid works like this. You have power producers that send the power to a regional transmission operator or independent system operator, which does the balancing and runs the market for energy, goes into transmission distribution, the edge of the grid, and into your home, into your factory. You have electrons going one way. Actually, electrons go the other way. And you have money going upstream here, right? That's the traditional grid. It's changing. And what's happening is that it's becoming a very bidirectional grid. I have panels on my roof. I am sending that energy back into the grid, and somebody is paying me. So the rupees and the electrons are going both ways, every way. It's an omnidirectional grid. The boundaries between transmission and distribution are beginning to blur because you cannot just plan one thing without knowing the other. And then you have all these digital tools. I'll just call them DPP for now. I'll explain in the next chart. You have all these digital tools that are used by transmission, by operators, by distribution. They do different kinds of analytics, congestion analysis, capacity planning. You have all these tools that people use, except they don't really talk to each other. And if you want this system to work reliably, what you need is some sort of common energy platform or some kind of common orchestrator. In other words, hey, the sun is shining, the wind is blowing, let's get everybody to deal with it, and let's get the grid edge to consume more and give them incentives to pre-charge, preheat, all of that good stuff. And no, the sun is not shining, and we know this because we have good forecasting, and everything ripples down here, and we send the signals to the grid edge, all automated, to say, don't consume. If you can, we'll give you a reward for consuming at a later time. Just turn up your thermostat 1 degree. You won't even notice, but across 1 million homes, that's a significant load.
Shall I finish in a minute?
I'm sorry? 2? Yep. I'll wrap very quickly. So on this page, I'm going to give you a proposal of a digital system that we need for our future energy so we can skate to where the puck is going. And on the next page, I'll tell you a few principles to keep in mind if your startup is to be successful, and I'll conclude. So, 3 dimensions here. In any sort of energy project, you have some phases. You have pre-commissioning. So let's say I'm building a wind farm. I have to study the wind patterns in the last 100 years and ask myself, how much will I produce and how will I get financing? That's pre-commissioning. The operations, the repowering or hybridizing if I decide to add storage to my generation plant, and my end of life. This could be for solar, it could be for wind, it could be for storage, it could be for nuclear, thermal, whatever, right? And grid operations. Now, I can have different types of analytics. I can have descriptive analytics, which just gives me situational awareness of all my assets. What's working, what's not, how much is it producing, is it shut down, is it giving me an error code? I can have predictive analytics where I'm predicting the future. What is tomorrow's production of solar energy, tomorrow's production of wind, tomorrow's demand? Will I have an excess of energy? Will I have a shortfall? Am I going to charge? Am I going to discharge? I'm predicting the future with good weather modeling. That's going to be key. Prescriptive analytics, where I prescribe how to get the most out of my equipment. So I'm using condition monitoring to understand that this turbine has some vibration. That's a problem. Can I do an inexpensive up tower repair now instead of an expensive down tower repair later? And then the orchestration, where everything talks to everything and the signals autonomically go around and give you the incentives so that the system is self-balanced. And if it's ever not self-balanced, the prices start peaking and it automatically gets self-balanced, because the only thing that ever works is economics, right? And finally, of course, we would love an autonomous system where you set it and forget it. Now, I didn't say artificial intelligence. I didn't say machine learning. I will only say that for every type of these analytics, you use the best methods available to do what's needed there. So table stakes for successful software, a very scalable architecture. This system will have petabytes of data flowing through it per day. Best practices on using the cloud, fully cyber secure, extraordinarily important. From the ground up, modular, integratable with existing floors, developed in a very classic computer science style, and of course, modern day, everything responsive and usable from your mobile. So these are the elements of a vision for a digital future, and I think there's just tremendous opportunity if we can just skate to where the puck is going. Thank you very much.
Kind of attending an English poetry class, honestly. It was, I don't know how many of you felt that, and especially like when it was like 3 slides before, it was like really, it brought me the memories of my English classes in the school. Thanks for really taking back to my literature.
You're very welcome if you invite me back.
Would love to. Yeah. So one thing is that I love the kind of optimism that you kind of like put onto us now. While we do scale up, the cost comes down. So like the way you've started, you said it's going to be more optimistic. I really felt that. One thing I felt missing is that, like, I'm going to ask the first question, by the way. So we said as we scale everything up, the cost is going to go down. But we are finding it's very different. Before, when people scale up, the word decarbonization, sustainability, circular economy never came into the play. It can be like what Rajneesh has mentioned about hydrogen usage in certain segment, let's say steel segment. Before, the hydrogen cost was very low. Now the cost of hydrogen is going to be very high, and cost of mining is going to be very high. Cost of regulation and regulatory approvals are going to be very high. When we have so many of these new nuances have come into the whole system, how do you expect the scale up is going to happen very quickly? Of course, once you overcome this barrier, I think it might go down. But there is a barrier now, which did not exist in the past. I think that mic is not working. Do you want to use this? Sure. Yeah, sure.
Anytime you move to a new technology, there will be barriers. And the key is to make that barrier divided by the scale. If it's a barrier that is paid for per kilowatt hour or per customer, then as the technology scales up, the barrier disappears, right? If it's a barrier that's like a CapEx, big one up front, but it can be amortized, right? Then it becomes more of a financing problem than anything else, right? So the truth here is that the base of this pyramid is 1 kilowatt hour. And if you can produce that for 1 rupee, you can change everyone's life and decarbonize at the same time. Sure. And I think there's a clear vision on how to get there.
Thank you. So take one more question. Yeah.
Oh, that was a wonderful presentation. Thank you. So your Google chart was very, very interesting, but we tend to live in a multi-dimensional world. And I would probably suggest that adding education on the use of energy to that chart would take us somewhere. So in that direction, I wonder if you have any information regarding how much energy we could use if we educate people to use less energy in their own lives.
Yeah, good two-part question. Thank you for that. The picture has many more dimensions than my PowerPoint skills. So there's already 3 dimensions there, but you're absolutely right. It's more complex than that. And the key is that whatever we build has to work with our existing systems, right? However, I do firmly believe that there will be some extraordinary breakthrough in digital software to orchestrate energy. And these are the essential elements that we will need to be successful. That's the point I was trying to convey. Now, the other question you asked is, can we convince people to use less energy? Can we convince them to buy EVs? Can we convince them to use heat pumps? Can we convince them to live zero-waste lives? It's an extraordinarily uphill battle. So what people want to hear is, I like my big house or big car or wasteful habits or whatever. You guys got us into this mess. You get us out of it, So all I'm saying is, you could say, for example, please, people, have less children. That's maybe one of the biggest ways of reducing carbon impact in the future. But that's not an acceptable thing to say. So I look at this very much from an engineering point of view and say, how do we lift up people and give them their quality of life, give them what they enjoy in life, and at the same time save the planet? So if you drive an EV and you want a bigger vehicle, have at it. If you have heat pumps to heat and cool your home and you want a bigger home, have at it, right? So that's kind of where I come from on this. Because the psychology aspect, the social behavior aspect, I do not understand, and it seems like an incredibly hard problem to solve.